A quiet neighborhood freezes when a little girl collapses on her porch, her feet burning like she's standing on fire. Across the street, a millionaire slams his brakes, recognizing symptoms he thought he'd buried with his past. Her stepmother watches coldly, too calmly, as the child trembles on the ground. And in that moment, he knows, this isn't an accident. Something in that house has been hurting her for a long time. He steps out of his car, and everything in her life is about to change. She stretched, toes pointing under the blanket, and the moment the soft fabric brushed the skin of her feet, a strange tiny sting pricked along her soles. It was quick, like stepping on a grain of salt, and she frowned, half asleep, rubbing one foot against the other. The feeling vanished. Probably nothing, she told herself, the way she did when shadows in the hallway looked like monsters but weren't. From downstairs came the clink of dishes and the hollow rush of water in the sink. The sound meant one thing: her stepmother, Diane, was already in the kitchen. Emma's stomach gave a small nervous twist that had nothing to do with hunger. She thought of the way Diane watched the clock more than she watched Emma, the way her lips pinched when cereal bowls weren't put away perfectly, the way she could turn a simple, good morning, into something Emma felt guilty about all day. Emma pushed herself up to sit, blanket pulling around her waist. The sting in her feet was gone, and for a few seconds she almost forgot about it, squinting at the rectangle of light on the floor and listening for her dad's voice. He should have been humming by now, that silly off-key tune he always whistled when he made coffee, the sound that usually made mornings feel softer. But the only thing she heard was the scrape of a chair and the distant, sharp tick of the kitchen clock. "Dad," she called softly, more to the empty room than to anyone who might answer. No reply. She swallowed, suddenly aware of the way her own heartbeat sounded too loud in her ears. With a small breath, she swung her legs over the edge of the bed and put her bare feet down onto the soft pink rug. The world exploded into fire. Pain shot up from the bottoms of her feet so fast she didn't even have time to scream. Her breath just ripped out of her in a broken gasp, and her knees buckled as if the floor had turned to hot metal. It felt like someone had held the soles of her feet over a stove burner, a deep raw burning that clawed its way up into her ankles. She snatched her feet up off the rug, curling them under her, but the pain stayed, blazing and wild. Tears blurred her vision so quickly that her bedroom turned into a watery smear of pink and blue. "Dad," she tried again, louder this time, her voice cracking on the single syllable. No answer. Her hands shook as she grabbed the edge of the mattress, breathing in short, panicky gulps. The burning climbed, bright and unbearable, as if invisible flames licked at her skin. She tried to wiggle her toes, to see if they would move, but even the idea of it made her stomach flip. Footsteps came down the hallway, not her father's slow, heavy tread, but the quicker, sharper click of Diane's heels. The bedroom door flew open without a knock, bumping against the stop on the wall. "Emma, what on earth is taking you so?" Diane's words sliced off as her eyes landed on the little girl huddled on the bed, face wet, arms wrapped around her legs. For a heartbeat, Emma thought she saw something soft flash across Diane's expression, something almost like concern. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the familiar tightness around her mouth. "Why are you sitting there crying?" Diane asked, voice cool and flat, as if Emma were complaining about the wrong brand of cereal. "Do you have any idea what time it is?" Emma opened her mouth, but the words tangled with the sobs caught in her throat. She pointed helplessly at her feet instead, the motion jarring another wave of stabbing heat that made her gasp. "It hurts," she managed, voice a hoarse whisper. "My feet, they're burning, please, I can't stand on them." Diane's gaze flicked down, cool and assessing, taking in the smooth pink skin, the perfectly ordinary rug, the lack of any visible injury. She didn't step closer, she didn't kneel, or reach out a hand. She just folded her arms and sighed, a long, annoyed sound that didn't match the panic rushing through the room. "Emma, there is nothing wrong with your feet," she said, each word measured. "You're being dramatic again, and we do not have time for this. Your father has already left for work, and I will not have you making us late over some imaginary problem." Emma stared at her, stunned. The pain felt so real she could taste it, metallic and hot at the back of her tongue. She lifted one trembling foot into the air, as if Diane might see the flames she was sure were there. "I'm not making it up," she whispered, the words wobbling. Diane glanced at the clock on the wall behind Emma's head and pressed her lips together in a thin line. Her eyes went flat as she seized Emma's arm and marched her hard toward the front door. The moment Diane yanked the front door open, a gust of cold morning air rushed into the hallway, brushing against Emma's tear-streaked face and raising tiny bumps along her arms. She tried to dig her heels into the hardwood floor, but even the slight pressure of her feet touching down sent another surge of scorching pain climbing up her legs. Her breath hitched, sharp and quick, as she tried to steady herself on the edge of the rug. It felt as if the heat inside her feet was fighting against the chill drifting in from outside, a strange and painful tug of war that made her vision pulse at the corners. She clung to the doorframe, hoping for even a moment's pause, but Diane's firm grip pushed her forward again. The cold air should have been comforting, but instead it only seemed to amplify the burning, making the contrast so intense that Emma wondered if something inside her skin was tearing apart. For a moment Emma felt her vision blur again, not from tears but from the strain of trying to remain upright. She fought to keep her balance, but every attempt sent fresh waves of pain climbing higher through her calves. Her fingers twitched toward the porch railing again, but her stepmother stood too close, blocking her path, as if she didn't trust the child even to lean on something without turning it into another scene. It was then that Emma noticed a faint movement out of the corner of her eye, someone across the street shifting behind their front window. At first she thought she was imagining it, but then the shape moved again. A neighbor, their face half hidden behind the curtain, watching the porch with a slow, uncertain tilt of the head. Emma's heart leaped with a mix of hope and fear. Maybe they would come out. Maybe they would ask if she was okay. Maybe they would see what Diane couldn't, or wouldn't, see. The curtain shifted once more, and the neighbor's silhouette leaned forward slightly, as though trying to understand why a small child stood barefoot in the cold, shaking as if she might collapse at any moment. For one fragile second, Emma felt a spark of relief, the idea that she wasn't completely invisible after all. But before the neighbor could step outside or even lift a hand, Diane followed Emma's gaze. Her posture stiffened, and a fleeting shadow crossed her face, something sharp and defensive. Without a word, she wrapped her hand around Emma's arm again, spun her back toward the house, and shoved the door shut behind them with a decisive force that cut off the outside world completely. The moment the door slammed behind them, the muffled quiet of the house wrapped around Emma like a suffocating blanket. The porch's icy sting still clung to her skin, and the burning inside her feet raged even louder now that she was back in the warm hallway. Diane released her arm with a quick flick, as though touching her any longer might somehow pull her into the drama she insisted didn't exist. Emma wobbled where she stood, trying to pretend her legs could still hold her weight, but the burning pulsed in deep, vicious waves that made her toes twitch uncontrollably. She stared at the hardwood floor, hoping that if she breathed slowly enough the trembling might stop, but her feet jerked beneath her like they had minds of their own. She tried to take a single step toward the kitchen, thinking maybe walking would break whatever spell had taken hold of her muscles. But the moment she shifted her weight, her foot buckled sharply, crashing her heel into the floor with a burst of pain so intense it felt like electricity firing straight up her spine. She gasped and grabbed for the wall, her fingertips scraping the paint as she fought to stay upright. The burning radiated upward, no longer trapped in her feet but spreading through her ankles, her shins, climbing with terrifying determination. Every tiny movement sent another hot shock through her bones, and her legs shook harder, the tremor visible even through her pajama pants. Behind her, Diane clicked her tongue, a small sound of impatience that sliced straight through the air. Honestly, Emma, you're going to make yourself sick with all this nonsense. Walk properly. Children your age don't fall apart over a little discomfort. Emma swallowed hard, her throat tight. The trembling in her legs wasn't something she could stop. It wasn't tantrum tremble or scared tremble. It felt like her muscles were locking and unlocking too fast, like her body was trying to hold itself together but forgetting how. I'm trying, she whispered, but her voice barely rose above the soft hum of the refrigerator. She made another attempt, shifting her right foot forward, and immediately the burning flared again, sharper and hotter. She lifted the foot off the floor instinctively, hoping the pain would ease, but the moment her toes left the wood, the agony spread into the joints, twisting tight and merciless. It didn't matter if she put weight on them or not, the fire stayed, pulsing, bright and angry. Diane crossed her arms, her expression flattening with the practiced irritation that had been growing in the home for months, subtle signs Emma had learned to read even when no words were spoken. The unopened mail stacked on the counter, all addressed to her father, never touched by Diane. The calendar on the wall with every square blank, though Diane insisted she kept track of everything. The way the house felt colder now, not from the temperature but from the way silence formed walls thicker than any door. Emma could feel every piece of it pressing down on her, the long-term neglect hidden in plain sight, woven into the walls just as tightly as the insulation. "You've always had this flair for dramatics," Diane said, brushing imaginary lint off her sleeve. "Your father may let it slide, but I refuse to indulge it. Focus your mind and it will pass. If you keep feeding these little ideas, of course they'll feel bigger." Emma stared at her, trying to process the words, trying to match them with the burning tearing through her legs. Diane's voice sounded distant, filtered through the roar of her own heartbeat. She wanted to tell her stepmother that something was wrong, deeply wrong, in a way she couldn't explain with kid words or calm sentences. But even forming those thoughts was hard when every nerve in her feet screamed like they were lit from the inside. She braced one hand on the wall and tried again to walk. One step, just one. Her toes curled painfully as they touched the floor, and she forced them flat, breathing shallowly through her nose. Her other foot followed, hesitating before landing. The moment it touched down, the full weight of her small body sent another brutal radiating burn up her legs. She jerked forward with a sharp cry she tried to swallow, but it spilled out anyway, raw and thin. Diane exhaled sharply, not in concern but in annoyance, like Emma had interrupted her in the middle of something important. "Emma, enough," she said, her tone rising, crisp and strangely cold even though the hallway was warm. "You've made your point. Now stop acting like you're going to crumble every time you feel something unusual. This is why routines matter. This is why your father and I keep telling you to wake up earlier and—" But Emma didn't hear the rest. Her knees suddenly buckled as the burning seized the muscles in her calves, tightening them so hard she felt a jolt of panic rip through her chest. The floor seemed to tilt under her, the hallway stretching out like a long tunnel. Her vision wavered, the edges darkening, and she reached for the wall again but missed. The pain surged again, stronger than before, a deep, pulsing heat that made her legs give way completely. Her knees hit the floor, not with a hard crash, but with a slow, helpless collapse. Her fingers spread across the wood, but she wasn't holding herself up, she was just falling in slow motion, her body surrendering to the burning that wouldn't stop. She tried to lift her head, tried to catch Diane's expression, hoping this moment would finally break through whatever wall stood between them. But instead of stepping forward, instead of reaching down with even a hesitant hand, Diane stepped back. It was subtle, one quiet shift of her foot, one small pull of her shoulders away from the child on the floor, but the meaning fell heavier than anything else in the room. Emma's breath hitched, not just from the pain but from the realization settling cold and heavy inside her. Whatever was happening to her, she was facing it alone. And Diane's retreating step echoed louder than the burning racing up Emma's legs, louder than her own choked breaths, louder than the silence that swallowed the hallway whole. The morning sun had just begun to filter through the line of tall maples bordering Crescent Lane when the deep purr of an engine broke the quiet. A sleek graphite grey Aston Martin eased around the curve, its polished surface catching streaks of gold light. Behind the wheel sat Donovan Hale, a name that floated around business magazines and late-night interviews, usually paired with words like self-made, tech visionary, and impossibly private. He wasn't the kind of man who drove through quiet suburbs without a reason, yet here he was, allowing himself the detour he normally avoided, using these calm streets as a way to clear his mind before a day of meetings and projections that never seemed to stop. His tailored jacket rested neatly across the passenger seat, and his coffee sat untouched in the cup holder. His thoughts had been too crowded for caffeine, too wide for calm. As he turned onto the second stretch of the lane, something unusual caught his eye, a flicker of movement on a porch to his right, subtle enough that another driver might have missed it. Donovan instinctively eased his foot off the accelerator, the engine softening to a low hum as he glanced toward the Turner house. At first, he assumed a child was simply playing outside, maybe waiting for a school bus or searching for a misplaced shoe. But then he saw her. A small girl, maybe 8 or 9, knelt on the wooden planks of the porch, her upper body trembling in uneven spasms she couldn't control. Her hair fell in messy strands around her face, and her arms shook as she tried to push herself upright, only to flinch and freeze as if something invisible held her down. The way her knees pressed into the wood wasn't the posture of a child tying a shoelace or reaching for a toy. It looked like collapse, soft, exhausted, and frighteningly quiet. Donovan's brows pulled together, his hands tightened instinctively around the steering wheel, though he wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the unnatural angle of her feet, or the way her shoulders curled in on themselves, or the tiny breathless whimper he thought he heard even from inside his car. Whatever it was, something about the sight sliced through the usual buffer that kept him distant from strangers' problems. He slowed the car even more, his curiosity edging into concern. He scanned the porch and saw no adult in sight. Just the girl, struggling as though even gravity had turned against her. Her legs trembled under her, the tremors sharp enough that he could see them from the street. She tried to brace herself on her hands, pushing upward centimeter by centimeter, only to collapse back down as her feet twisted inward in a way that made his chest tighten. She wasn't just tired. She wasn't being dramatic. Something was very wrong. The Aston Martin crept forward, nearly idling. Donovan leaned closer to the windshield, studying her posture with the kind of focus he usually reserved for decoding data anomalies or reading people in high-stakes negotiations. He had grown up watching his younger sister struggle with sudden, unexplained nerve pain, episodes that took years for doctors to understand. He remembered the helpless way she tried to steady herself, the trembling that overtook her legs, the way adults often dismissed it as overreacting. The memory rose inside him with startling force, brushing the edges of emotions he never allowed himself to revisit. He blinked hard, pushing the recollection back, but the familiarity of the girl's trembling pulled it forward again. The small quiver of her hands. The strange way her toes curled tightly as though trapped in some invisible fire. The unfocused panic in her eyes. He recognized it. He had seen that exact look before, pain mixed with fear, mixed with confusion about why no one believed it. As he watched, the girl attempted once more to rise. She gripped the porch railing with tiny fingers that strained desperately, trying to steady herself. Her feet wobbled beneath her, unable to hold the smallest portion of her weight. The way she gasped, the way her body jerked with each attempt, made something cold settle deep in Donovan's stomach. His empathy wasn't the soft kind. It didn't flutter. It hit like a jolt, sudden and unavoidable. It was the feeling he thought he'd locked away alongside the memories of a hospital waiting room where he'd sat for hours as a child, swinging his legs beneath a plastic chair while nurses whispered updates about his sister. Even now, decades later, the echo of it sharpened his focus. He glanced once more for the presence of an adult, someone who might have been guiding her, supporting her, reassuring her. But the porch remained empty except for the girl. He saw the faint outline of movement behind the front window, yet nothing and no one came toward her. She was alone, and her pain was as clear as if she'd shouted it. The car rolled forward another few feet, slow enough that the tires barely whispered against the asphalt. Donovan's mind tried to offer him a reasonable exit. Maybe she'd simply woken up too fast, maybe her parent was coming any second, maybe he was misinterpreting the scene entirely. But each rational explanation collapsed the moment he saw her arms shake from the effort of just holding herself upright. Suspense seeped into his thoughts, a tightening coil that made it impossible for him to look away. The world outside his car had narrowed down to a single fragile shape trembling on a porch. The tech world, the investors waiting for him, the full schedule that had been mapped out for months, all of it faded beneath a single instinct he couldn't override. He pressed the brake gently. The Aston Martin came to a complete stop. His decision arrived quietly, not with a dramatic internal declaration, but with a simple recognition: he couldn't drive past her. He couldn't be the man who saw a child in that much distress and kept going because he had somewhere important to be. With a slow, deliberate motion, Donovan pushed open his car door. The morning air swept inside, cool and clear, carrying the faint sound of the girl's hitched breathing. He stepped out, feet landing firmly on the pavement, his eyes locked on the small trembling figure who had brought his world to a full halt. And for the first time in years, Donovan Hale didn't care about being late. He couldn't drive away, not now, not after seeing her like this. Donovan's steps were quiet, measured, almost hesitant as he approached the porch, but his eyes never left the girl. Each trembling movement she made seemed to tighten something inside his chest, pulling memories he had spent years burying back to the surface. When he was close enough to see her feet clearly, the world paused around him. The girl tried to brace herself again, her toes curling sharply inward, her arch tightening as if responding to a signal her brain never meant to send. The tremor that followed wasn't random, it was rhythmic, patterned, painfully familiar. His breath caught. He hadn't seen that exact posture since he was 9, since he watched his younger sister struggle with the same unpredictable surges of burning pain, the same involuntary twisting of her muscles, the same collapsing weakness no adult believed until the diagnosis came years late. The memories hit him in a slow, heavy wave, the kind that didn't crash but drowned. His throat tightened as he realized he wasn't simply witnessing a child in pain. He was watching the first signs of a condition he had sworn he'd never overlook again. He swallowed, his jaw tense, and took a step closer. The girl lifted her head slightly, her eyes glassy from the pain but still alert enough to register the presence of a stranger. Her lower lip trembled as she attempted to shift her weight again, her feet recoiling in the same distorted motion he remembered too well. The burning episode, the collapse, the inability to control the muscles, his sister's episodes looked just like this at the beginning. He remembered holding her hand in the hallway as she tried to stand, telling her it would stop soon even though he never knew how long it would last. The memory of sitting beside her on cold tile floors, watching her legs shake uncontrollably, made his hand clench into a fist at his side. He forced himself to exhale, to stay steady. This wasn't his sister. This was a child who needed help right now, and the adult who should have been helping her stood only a few feet away, tense, guarded, clearly uncomfortable with his attention. Diane appeared at the threshold, her posture stiff as if she'd materialized there to block his view. She didn't greet him. She didn't offer explanation. Instead, she offered a tight, polite smile that failed to reach her eyes. "She's fine," she said quickly, her voice smooth but stretched thin at the edges. "She just gets like this in the mornings. Dramatic, sensitive. She'll be up in a minute." The dismissal hit Donovan harder than he expected, slicing through the fragile patience he normally carried in public. He kept his gaze on the girl, watching as she tried once more to lift her foot only for it to twist inward again with a sharp, involuntary jerk. The burning expression flickered across her face, a mix of shock and fear, one he recognized from years of watching someone he loved crumble under the same mysterious torment. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion but in recognition deeper than words. "This isn't dramatics," he said quietly, voice steady despite the tension rising in him. Diane's shoulders stiffened. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the doorframe as though she needed something to anchor her. "With respect," he continued, "I've seen this before." Diane's expression flickered, just a tiny movement, but enough to betray that his interest unsettled her. She shifted subtly, as if placing herself between the man and the child, though she didn't step forward to help the girl who still knelt trembling at her feet. Donovan noticed everything, the slight flinch when he spoke, the defensive set of her jaw, the way she kept rearranging her features into an unconvincing smile. Her discomfort wasn't about the girl's pain, it was about being observed. About being questioned. The emotional tension stretched the air thin around them, a silent tug of war between his rising concern and her growing unease. Donovan took another slow step toward the porch, close enough now to see the precise pattern of the tremors in the child's legs. His voice softened. "What's your name?" he asked the girl. She opened her mouth but winced, as if the effort of speaking cost too much energy. "Emma," she whispered, barely audible. Diane cut in instantly. "She's fine." But Emma's trembling intensified the moment her stepmother spoke, as though stress fed the waves of burning moving through her body. Donovan's eyes flicked toward Diane, not accusing, but clearly unconvinced. His concern now was unmistakable, steady, focused, and grounded in recognition rather than assumption. He remembered the first specialist who recognized his sister's symptoms, the one who finally told their family, "You're not imagining this, and she isn't pretending." That sentence had changed everything. Years of doubt evaporated in a single moment of validation. He saw that same desperate need for understanding reflected in Emma's eyes, the unspoken plea of a child who didn't have the words to explain what was happening inside her body. Her tiny hands pressed against the porch boards as she tried to lift herself onto her heels, her breath coming in fast, trembling gasps. Donovan instinctively reached out a hand, not to grab her, but to be ready if she needed support. Diane stepped sideways, blocking the gesture with a tense laugh. "Really, it's just a morning thing. Kids exaggerate." Donovan didn't look away from Emma. "No," he said quietly, with the certainty of a man who knew exactly what he was seeing. "Kids don't exaggerate this kind of pain. Not with movements like that." The words hung between them, heavy and unyielding. Diane's expression tightened, her polite facade cracking just enough to reveal discomfort bordering on panic. She folded her arms and looked away, avoiding his eyes. The shift only deepened Donovan's unease. Something wasn't right, not just with Emma's condition, but with the environment she was in. And the girl's trembling, her collapsing posture, the clear progression of her symptoms left no room for doubt in his mind. He crouched slightly, lowering himself to Emma's level without touching her. "I know it hurts," he murmured, his voice steady and careful. "I've seen this before. You're not imagining it." Emma's eyes filled with tears, not from pain alone, but from the fragile relief of being believed for the first time that morning. Just as Donovan opened his mouth to ask her another question, Emma attempted to shift again. Her foot, already twisted with tension, buckled sharply, folding inward with a sudden, jerking motion that forced a small cry from her throat. And in that instant, the last trace of doubt vanished. His suspicion was confirmed. The moment Emma's foot twisted inward, her small body lurched to the side in a slow, dangerous tilt. The cry that slipped from her throat was thin and broken, the sound of someone trying desperately not to fall but losing the battle second by second. Donovan reacted before his mind had even caught up with the movement. In one smooth, instinctive motion, he closed the distance between them and placed a steady hand near her back, not gripping her, not startling her, just anchoring her gently so she wouldn't collapse onto the porch. His other hand hovered near her shoulder, offering support without force, the respectful touch of someone who understood how fragile her balance had become. Emma leaned into the stability without meaning to, her trembling muscles simply surrendered to the nearest safe place. Diane flinched, her eyes widening for the first time that morning, her composure cracking with a quick intake of breath. She hadn't expected him to move that fast. She hadn't expected him to involve himself at all. For a moment her expression flickered between surprise and annoyance before settling into a stiff defensiveness. She stepped closer, as if trying to reclaim control of the moment, but she hesitated when she saw how carefully Donovan supported the child. No dramatics, no panic, just calm precision. It made her reaction look exaggerated by comparison, and she seemed to realize it. Emma's breathing had become shallow and erratic, the tremors in her legs now sharp enough that Donovan could feel the tiny vibrations even through the air between them. He crouched slightly, keeping his body steady and low so she wouldn't feel overwhelmed. "Easy," he murmured, his voice gentle but urgent, the tone of someone who had guided a child through pain before. "You're all right, Emma. You're not falling. I've got you." The reassurance wasn't dramatic, but it was solid enough that Emma's fingers unclenched from the porch boards. She looked up at him with wide, watery eyes, not quite trusting that the burning would subside but trusting the steadiness in his posture. Donovan kept one hand braced just beside her back, letting her choose the exact point of contact. She leaned only as much as she needed, her small frame shaking through every breath. Diane shifted her weight again, irritation tightening her features. "I told you," she said quickly, her voice too bright, too firm, as though she were trying to override what he had just witnessed. "She has these little moments. She gets scared and then it gets worse. It's best not to encourage." Encourage? Donovan's tone didn't rise, but the single word cut through her explanation with startling clarity. He didn't look at Diane when he said it. His attention remained locked on Emma, his eyes scanning her feet, her knees, the tense curl of her toes, the strain in her lower legs. He studied each detail the way a doctor would, or someone who had memorized symptoms out of necessity rather than curiosity. There was a quiet urgency in the way he watched her, an urgency that made Diane shift uncomfortably on her heels. Emma winced as another wave of pain surged through her legs. Her hands trembled so hard she couldn't keep them flat on the porch. Donovan reached his arm slightly around her side, offering firmer support this time, still gentle but more decisive. "It's getting worse," he said tightly, mostly to himself but loud enough that Diane couldn't ignore it. Her muscles are locking up. "This isn't fear. This is escalation." Diane's lips pressed into a thin line. "Children exaggerate. She's always been sensitive. She has a habit of." "She's not exaggerating," he interrupted again, still without raising his voice. His tone stayed steady, but its certainty left no room for negotiation. He glanced briefly at Diane, and for the first time, she stepped back as though the intensity in his gaze physically pushed her. "Pain like this isn't imaginary. You don't shake like this from being sensitive." Emma's breaths came in small, choking gasps as she tried to fight the next surge of burning. Her face scrunched, not just from the physical agony but from the fear of collapsing again. Donovan angled his body so she could lean into him without fully being lifted, letting her keep control of her weight while still preventing a fall. He had once held his sister the same way, supportive but not overbearing, calm but quick, always careful not to make her feel helpless. The memory pushed him forward now, sharpening his attention and sharpening the urgency threading through him. He glanced at Emma's feet again and noticed the way her right ankle twitched rhythmically, a deep spasm followed by a small, involuntary jerk. It wasn't random. It followed a familiar pattern he had hoped he would never see outside his childhood home. A small sigh escaped him, more grief than frustration, as if some old wound he thought had healed had split open again. Emma, he said gently, does the burning feel worse when you move or when you're still? The question was soft but pointed. Emma's lips trembled as she tried to answer. When I tried to stand, she whispered, tears spilling again. It gets hotter, like fire. Diane stepped forward suddenly, her defensive energy spiking. She says things like that all the time. Children use dramatic language. That doesn't mean anything is truly wrong. This time Donovan did look at her directly. The shift in his posture was subtle but unmistakable. The calmness remained, but the patience had thinned to a delicate thread. I'm not basing this on her words, he said quietly. I'm basing this on what I can see. He pointed gently with his free hand toward Emma's feet, not touching, just indicating. The tremors, the posture, the spasming in her ankle, the involuntary flex in her toes, the collapsing weakness. This is not acting. This is not routine. This is not something she does in the mornings. Diane opened her mouth to argue again, but the words faltered on her tongue. The weight of Donovan's calm certainty made her glance away for a moment, as if unsure how to respond. It wasn't just that he disagreed, it was the depth of experience behind his words, something she could feel even if she didn't understand it. Emma gasped again, a sudden sharp breath that tightened her entire body. Donovan shifted immediately, steadying her with both hands now but still without lifting her off the ground. The burning wave passed slowly, leaving her shaking harder than before. The truth pressed thicker into the air with each second, impossible to dismiss, impossible to ignore. Diane felt it too, the tension in her jaw gave her away. She looked not at Emma, but at Donovan, as though he were the problem, not the pain unraveling the child in front of them. The silence that followed was brief but heavy. Emma trembled violently, her strength fading in quick, uneven intervals. Donovan adjusted his stance again, protecting her from slipping forward. Then, slowly, he lifted his head and turned fully toward the stepmother. The steady calm in his eyes had transformed into something sharper, quiet, unblinking, demanding. And the look he fixed on her asked for answers she was no longer prepared to hide from. The porch had gone completely still except for Emma's trembling, and the longer Donovan watched her struggle, the more a quiet dread threaded itself into his thoughts. Pain this intense didn't appear out of nowhere. Not with this posture, not with these spasms, not with the way her legs buckled as though they'd been battling something far longer than the morning's first light. He lowered himself to one knee beside her, careful not to crowd her, but close enough to observe details that only someone with experience would notice: the faint discoloration near her ankles where circulation had repeatedly faltered, the subtle tension in her calves that suggested frequent overcompensation, the way her toes curled inward not as a response to cold but as a protective, involuntary reflex. These were not new signs. This was a story written across her body, layer by layer, over months, maybe years. Behind him, Diane shifted, her arms crossing tightly over her chest as if she could shield herself from the implications forming in his silence. She cleared her throat, attempting a casual tone that didn't match the nerves flickering across her face. She gets episodes like this sometimes, she said lightly. It's nothing serious. Kids have growing pains, sensitive nerves. You know how it is. She'll settle down once she stops thinking about it. Donovan didn't look at her. Instead, he scanned Emma's expression. The little girl's breathing was shallow, shaky, and too fast. When he simply turned his head in Diane's direction, Emma's shoulders tensed, her trembling worsening for a moment as if the nearness of her stepmother triggered something deeper than pain. It wasn't the flinch of a child scared of yelling, it was the stiffening of a child who had learned that her discomfort was an inconvenience. A child who knew that her suffering would be minimized the moment she tried to speak it aloud. That realization hit him harder than he expected. He directed his attention back to Emma, softening his voice. Does this happen a lot? He asked gently. She hesitated, her small hands clutching at the porch boards. Her eyes flicked toward Diane for the briefest second, quick, fearful, instinctive. That glance told him everything. Diane stepped forward quickly, intercepting the moment. She's exaggerating, she said with a tight smile. She likes attention, especially in the mornings. If you give her too much of it, she'll carry on like this all day. Her tone sharpened slightly, defensive and dismissive all at once. Believe me, I know her patterns. Donovan's jaw tightened. Patterns. The calm in his voice had thinned, leaving something firmer behind. Yes, Diane replied, her chin lifting as if bracing herself. She gets dramatic when she feels overwhelmed. Or when she doesn't sleep enough. Or when she doesn't want to follow the routine. It's nothing serious, just behavior. Emma curled inward at those words, her shoulders shaking not just from pain but from the effort to stay silent. Donovan watched, noting the tiny flinch, the way she tried to hide her expression behind her hair. That wasn't dramatics. That was fear and resignation. He slowly shifted his stance, examining her feet again. A faint red flush covered the bottoms of her toes, as though they had been irritated for far longer than a single morning. There were tiny calluses where her skin had hardened unnaturally, the kind that formed when a child walked in pain often enough to compensate for it. Her ankles rolled inward in a way that suggested ongoing instability. These weren't temporary signs. This was long-term neglect masquerading as sensitivity. He exhaled slowly, feeling the old instinct of protectiveness rise inside him, the same one that had driven him to learn every symptom and pattern of his sister's condition. He recognized the look in Emma's eyes, the silent plea that asked not for rescue, but simply to be believed. "She's not pretending," Donovan said quietly. Diane stiffened. "You don't know that." "I do," he replied, his voice unshakable. "Because I've seen this before. And because no child can fake the muscle tremors in her legs right now." Emma winced sharply as a new wave of pain surged through her feet. Her hands trembled harder, fingers splaying helplessly over the porch surface. She looked at Donovan again, her eyes full of a raw, wordless desperation that made his stomach twist. He shifted closer, offering more support without touching her unless she leaned into it. His calm voice felt like a protective barrier around her. "You're okay, Emma. I'm right here." Diane scoffed, though the sound was brittle. "This is exactly what I mean. She acts up when strangers." Emma's breath hitched in terror before she even finished the sentence. That reaction did not belong to a child who felt safe with her caregiver. Donovan's suspicion sharpened instantly. He finally looked directly at Diane, and for the first time there was no softness behind his eyes. Only calculation, only concern, only a protective urgency growing too strong to disguise. Diane faltered under his stare, stepping back a half-inch, her confidence slipping. "This isn't what you think," she muttered. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned his focus back to Emma and noticed something new, something that made his pulse jump. Her left foot had started twitching rhythmically, but this time the movement wasn't confined to her toes or ankle. Her entire foot jerked in small, repetitive spasms that grew stronger every few seconds. Her knee began trembling in the same unnerving rhythm, a sign he recognized with chilling accuracy. It was no longer just burning pain or instability. This was early-stage nerve misfiring. A dangerous sign, one he had prayed he would never see again. Donovan inhaled sharply, his expression shifting from concern to quiet alarm. His eyes locked onto the new tremor pattern, watching the sharp, involuntary pulls of her muscles. And that's when he knew, without question, that whatever was happening to her was escalating beyond anything a dismissive explanation could cover. His gaze rose slowly, unblinking, until it met Diane's. And the moment their eyes locked, she knew he had noticed the one symptom she could no longer explain away. Donovan's gaze followed the sharp, involuntary spasms climbing up Emma's leg, each twitch more pronounced than the last. The trembling no longer looked random or triggered by fear alone, it followed the distinct, escalating rhythm he knew far too well. He had seen it in waiting rooms, on hospital beds, and in the way his younger sister used to curl forward trying to keep the spasms from overtaking her whole body. And now, watching Emma struggle to breathe through the same terrifying pattern, the truth struck him with a force that left no room for doubt. This wasn't clumsiness. This wasn't oversensitivity. This wasn't a morning tantrum. It was early-stage acute nerve spasming, the kind that often signaled peripheral nerve hyperreactivity syndrome, the rare childhood condition he thought he had left behind when his sister finally outgrew it. The burning pain, the collapsing weakness, the twisting posture, the tremors that traveled up the leg, every sign pointed toward the onset of a serious neurological flare. Left untreated, these episodes could spiral quickly, overwhelming the child's system, sometimes triggering temporary paralysis or dangerous muscle locking that restricted blood flow. The memory of waiting for ambulances, of holding ice packs against his sister's twitching ankles, burned through him as if years had not passed. He shifted closer to Emma, keeping his voice gentle but edged with urgency. "Her nerves are misfiring," he murmured, more to himself but loud enough for Diane to hear. "This isn't behavioral, this is neurological." Emma whimpered as another wave of pain struck, her small fingers clawing desperately at the porch boards. Donovan steadied her without lifting her, giving her a stable point to lean into while still allowing her body to dictate the movement. Diane let out a short, shaky laugh that didn't match her eyes. Neurological. Really now? She doesn't have anything serious. She's just dramatic. Sensitive children do this. It's normal. Donovan turned his head slowly, fixing her with a look so calm and unblinking it made the air between them feel thinner. Nothing about this is normal. And nothing about this started today. Diane stiffened, her arms tightening across her chest. I take care of her just fine, she snapped, her composure cracking. You don't know us. You don't know her history. You're assuming things because she's having one little episode. This is not little, he cut in quietly. The steadiness in his voice held more weight than shouting ever could. Her feet are cycling through heat surges, her muscles are locking, and her ankle is spasming in rapid patterns. That doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen to a child who's been properly cared for. Emma's breathing hitched again, her face twisting as the burning tore through her. The pain was no longer just in her feet, it had climbed into her calves, pulsing in deep, wrenching waves. She tried to lift one knee slightly, searching for relief, but the moment her weight shifted, her leg buckled so violently she nearly toppled forward. Donovan caught her with slow, guided pressure, keeping her upright without startling her. Easy, he murmured. Stay with me. I know it hurts. I know it feels like fire. But I'm right here. Emma swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. It's getting worse. The fear inside those words hollowed something in him. Diane exhaled sharply, irritation overtaking whatever thin patience she still pretended to have. She says that every time. She exaggerates everything. You're feeding into it. If you'd stop encouraging her. Encouraging. Donovan's eyes hardened, the icy control beneath his tone cutting straight through her dismissal. I'm watching a child lose control of her legs. I'm watching her struggle to breathe through pain she can't manage. And you're telling me it's exaggeration? Diane opened her mouth but couldn't form a coherent response. Her gaze darted between Donovan and Emma, her discomfort growing more visible by the second. She stepped forward as if to reassert authority, but the moment Emma noticed the movement, her shoulders flinched, and her trembling intensified. Donovan caught that reaction instantly. A child shouldn't be more afraid of a caregiver approaching than of the pain tearing through her body. The realization hardened into something sharp and immovable inside him. He shifted his focus back to Emma's legs, watching the spasms traveling in waves now. Her left foot jerked again, then twisted inward in a painful arc. The reaction forced a small cry from her lips, and her hands shook uncontrollably. Donovan's heartbeat quickened. This was the start of a full flare. He knew what came next: loss of movement, intensified burning, and the risk of her muscles locking so tightly they cut off circulation. A flare this strong should have been treated the moment the first signs appeared. Instead, she had been pushed onto a porch, left trembling, dismissed as dramatic. He swallowed, steadying himself. Emma, he said softly, I need to know if this happens a lot. Even when no one is watching. Emma hesitated, her breath shaking. She looked up at him, then quickly at Diane, and her eyes filled with a quiet terror that said more than words ever could. Donovan's jaw clenched. That wasn't a child hiding misbehavior. That was a child afraid of consequences. Diane rushed in with a defensive scoff. You're twisting things. She's emotional. She has a big imagination. I'm the only one who deals with her mornings, so I know what's real and what's not. No, he replied, his tone low and final. You've convinced yourself she's exaggerating because it's easier than accepting the truth. Another spasm surged through Emma's leg, this one so strong that her foot jerked entirely off the porch before slamming back down. She gasped, the sound raw and desperate. Donovan's hand moved instantly to steady her side. Her body tilted toward him, her weight nearly collapsing into his support. That was all he needed to see. He stood slowly, keeping one hand poised near her back to prevent another fall. When he lifted his head and looked at Diane, the decision was already written in his expression, cold, unwavering, absolute. She needs medical attention now, he said. Not later, not after calming down, not when it's convenient. Now. Diane opened her mouth, panic sharpening at the edges. You don't have the right. He cut her off without raising his voice. I'm not asking for permission. The next tremor hit Emma with brutal force, ripping a broken sound from her throat. Donovan's resolve locked into place. They could not stay here. Not even one more minute. Donovan didn't waste another second. Emma's legs spasmed again, harder this time, her knees buckling as though the burning inside her had reached a point her body could no longer fight. Her breaths came in short, frightened bursts, each one thinner than the last, and he could feel the moment her strength gave out entirely. Without hesitation, and without startling her with sudden force, he eased one arm beneath her upper back and the other beneath her knees, lifting her with careful, controlled support. He didn't hoist her abruptly or clutch her tightly. He moved with the practiced gentleness of someone who had carried a fragile body through a flare before. Emma tensed for a moment, instinctively fearing the movement, but then her trembling settled into his hold, her body leaning into the steadiness she couldn't find on her own feet. Her breath shuddered against his chest, the heat of her burning pain pulsing through every small movement she made. Diane reacted instantly, panic slicing through her composure. She rushed forward, hands snapping out as if she could simply pull Emma back by will alone. "Put her down," she demanded, her voice shaking despite her attempt to sound authoritative. "You can't just take her. She's fine. This will pass. She's being dramatic. She always is." But her words came out thin, brittle, and unconvincing. Emma flinched at the sound, her fingers curling weakly into the soft fabric of Donovan's shirt, as though bracing for another dismissal she no longer had the energy to endure. Diane reached for Donovan's arm, but he shifted just enough that her hand missed him by inches. He didn't shove or jerk away, he moved with a controlled precision that made her reach seem small and ineffective. It wasn't force, just purpose. "Enough," Donovan said quietly, his voice low and unwavering. He didn't look at Diane, choosing instead to keep his focus on Emma's face, where pain and exhaustion tangled in a way no child should ever have to endure. Her breathing was becoming irregular, stumbling between gasps and shallow pulls that made him tense. "She is not fine. Her nerves are in full flare. Every second you've spent denying it has pushed her closer to collapse." Diane shook her head frantically, her voice rising. "You don't understand. She gets like this when she wants attention. You're feeding into it. If you'd just let me handle her." But her sentence faltered as Emma whimpered softly, her eyes squeezing shut against another surge of burning. The sound wasn't exaggerated. It wasn't performed. It was raw, involuntary, and filled with a fear so real it cut through any narrative Diane tried to cling to. Donovan stepped back from the porch, maintaining absolute steadiness as he adjusted his hold to keep Emma supported without adding pressure to her trembling legs. He moved with the calm urgency of someone who refused to let panic cloud judgment. "I'm taking her to the nearest hospital," he said. "And unless you want to explain your inaction to a doctor, step aside." Diane's breath hitched in panic. "You can't take her. You have no right. Her father is not here," Donovan replied, still quiet, still composed, but with a note of finality that stopped her cold. "And she is in clear medical distress." Her face tightened, fear flickering behind her eyes, not fear for Emma, but fear of losing control over the situation unraveling in front of her. She took a step forward, then stopped as Emma whimpered again, her fingers gripping Donovan's shirt with trembling desperation. That tiny sound broke something fragile in the air. Even Diane's argument faltered, wavering under the undeniable evidence of the child's agony. Donovan exhaled slowly, adjusting his hold once more so Emma's head rested near his shoulder without straining her neck. "Emma," he murmured, voice steady and protective, "I'm getting you help. Stay with me. Just breathe." Her breaths grew faster instead of calmer, erratic and uneven, each inhale thinner than the last. She wasn't just in pain, she was scared enough that even the simple act of breathing seemed difficult. Donovan felt her trembling against him, the spasm still pulsing through her legs even though they no longer carried her weight. Her heartbeat fluttered rapidly, a quick, fragile rhythm that made his own chest tighten. They were past the point of debate, past the point of waiting. He moved down the steps with deliberate care, each step steady and controlled. The cool air hit Emma's skin, and she shivered violently, pressing closer to him as though trying to escape the cold and the burning at the same time. Diane followed but only made it down 2 steps before stopping abruptly, helplessness cracking her defensive posture. "You don't understand," she said again, but her voice lacked conviction now. Donovan didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. He crossed the walkway and approached the sleek car parked at the curb, the engine still warm from when he'd stopped. He opened the passenger door with careful precision, lowering Emma into the seat while keeping one hand braced behind her back until she was fully settled. She winced as another tremor shook her leg, and he instinctively steadied her ankle so it wouldn't twist painfully against the seat's edge. Her breathing quickened again, fast and shallow, panic pulling the air from her in uneven pulls. "Easy," he whispered, brushing a strand of hair away from her damp forehead. "I know it hurts. I know it's scary, but I've got you. We're almost moving. Just hold on." He reached across her to buckle the seatbelt gently, making sure it didn't press against her legs. Diane hovered several feet away, torn between protesting and retreating, her expression flickering with fear, frustration, and something darker, something that looked like dread of being exposed. She opened her mouth as though to make one last plea, but no sound came out. Donovan shut the car door quietly, then walked briskly around to the driver's side, sliding into his seat and starting the engine with a smooth, practiced motion. As the car pulled away from the curb, Emma's head leaned slightly to the side, resting weakly against the seat. Her breaths were still uneven, still shaky, but she kept her eyes open, watching him through a fog of pain. Halfway down the street, her lips parted. Her voice came out thin and fragile, barely louder than a whisper, yet unmistakably clear. "Don't take me back," she murmured. And the quiet terror in those words chilled him straight to the core. The engine roared louder than Donovan intended, the wheels gripping the asphalt with a sharp urgency as he accelerated down Crescent Lane. The neighborhood, usually peaceful and slow-moving in the early morning, blurred past in muted colors. Emma sat slumped against the passenger seat, her small body racked by intermittent tremors that shook her legs, then her arms, then her whole frame in waves she couldn't fight. The spasms were getting stronger, sharper, more rhythmic, more frightening. Donovan kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other hovering protectively near her shoulder, ready to steady her if she lurched again. Every few seconds he glanced over, watching the way her breathing faltered, the way her eyes fluttered in exhaustion, the way her fingers curled weakly against the seatbelt strap as though she were clinging to the last sliver of control. "Stay with me, Emma," he urged, voice steady despite the storm building inside him. "We're almost there." She didn't answer this time. Her breaths were thin, erratic, shaky little pulls that never seemed to fill her lungs all the way. Her feet twitched uncontrollably, the tremors traveling up her legs in uneven bursts, each one stronger than the last. She pressed her hand weakly against her thigh as if trying to hold her legs still, but her fingers couldn't grasp firmly, her muscles simply weren't listening anymore. Donovan's heart hammered against his ribs, a sharp echo of a memory he had prayed he would never relive. He was 8 again, sitting in the back seat of his father's old sedan, holding his sister's trembling hand as she gasped through her first full-blown nerve flare. Her legs had jerked the same way, sharp, uncontrolled spasms that seemed to roll up her body like a wave she couldn't outrun. His father drove with the same desperate urgency he felt now, and Donovan remembered staring at the back of that driver's seat, silently begging the car to go faster, to outrun the danger. That helplessness had stayed with him for decades, a shadow he learned to ignore but never truly forgot. Seeing Emma's trembling body bring that memory back felt like watching the past and present collide with terrifying clarity. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel, jaw set, shoulders locked. He refused to let history repeat itself, not with another child, not in front of him, not like this. He pressed harder on the accelerator, the car leaping forward with clean, powerful force. Street signs blurred. The morning brightness sharpened into a glare. His breaths came faster, controlled but edged with panic he wouldn't allow to surface. He forced himself to focus on the road, calculating every turn, every yellow light, every shortcut that might shave seconds off the drive. When he glanced at Emma again, the change was immediate and chilling. Her tremors were no longer sharp, they were slower, heavier, almost sluggish. The burning pain was stealing her strength so quickly her body couldn't keep up. Her eyelids drooped, fluttering weakly as if each blink required more energy than she had left. A sheen of sweat glistened across her forehead despite the car's cool air. Her breathing stuttered, then caught, then continued in thin, uneven threads. "Hey," Donovan said softly, reaching across to brush her hair away from her face. "Look at me, Emma. Keep your eyes open if you can." She tried. He saw the effort, the tiny lift of her chin, the small twitch in her brow. But the tremors drained her quickly again, and her head sagged back toward the seat. Fear tightened in his chest like a fist. He forced himself not to panic. Not yet. But inside, something primal stirred, an urgent dread that pushed him faster than logic alone ever could. The clinic came into sight at the end of the street, its white facade catching the early sunlight. Relief hit him in a swift, sharp wave, but it was immediately replaced by heightened worry as Emma's next tremor barely registered in her legs. Her muscles were weakening, shutting down, her condition escalating exactly the way he feared. "Almost there," he whispered. "Just hold on." He swerved into the clinic's driveway, the tires crunching sharply over the curb's edge. He didn't bother finding a parking space. He pulled directly up to the clinic's double doors, close enough that the bumper almost kissed the sidewalk. He threw the car into park and was out the door in seconds, rounding to Emma's side with a speed driven more by instinct than thought. When he opened the passenger door, a wave of heat rushed outward, her body radiating the feverish warmth of intensified nerve misfiring. Her breaths were even weaker now, barely lifting her chest. She blinked slowly, her lashes trembling like they were too heavy to lift. Donovan slipped one arm beneath her back and one beneath her knees again, lifting her with extraordinary care, making sure her legs stayed supported so no spasm would twist painfully. She felt lighter than before, too light. Exhaustion had hollowed something in her posture, leaving her limp in a way that terrified him. Inside the clinic lobby, a nurse behind the counter looked up, her expression shifting instantly from routine calm to sharp concern. "Sir, what happened?" she asked, rushing forward. But Donovan didn't answer immediately. His attention was on Emma, whose head had lolled gently against his chest as he stepped inside. Her breaths were shallow, uneven, slipping. He moved quickly toward the nearest exam room, guided by instinct more than direction, the nurse trailing behind him with concern rising in her voice. "Sir, we need to." But he barely heard her. His pulse thundered in his ears. Emma's fingers, which had earlier curled into his shirt with weak desperation, now lay open against his arm, unmoving. Her legs, previously trembling in harsh spasms, now hung with eerie stillness. And just as he crossed the threshold into the bright clinical light, ready to lay her gently onto the examination bed, her body suddenly went limp in his arms. Everything else in the world stopped. The moment Emma's body went limp, the room burst into motion. Two nurses surged forward, guiding Donovan toward the nearest bed while another pulled the curtain closed with a swift, practiced motion. The muted sound of the clinic lobby faded behind the thin partition, replaced by the urgent beeping of machines being activated, drawers sliding open, and clipped medical instructions exchanged between staff who instantly recognized the seriousness of what was unfolding. Donovan carefully lowered Emma onto the padded examination table, his hands steady even though his heart felt like it was pounding hard enough to shake the floor. Her head rolled gently to the side, her hair spreading across the pillow in a dark, uneven wave. Her skin was flushed with heat, her breath shallow, her eyelids fluttering like she was trapped somewhere between consciousness and the pain that had swallowed her strength whole. A doctor entered briskly, his coat swaying behind him, his voice firm and calm. "Tell me what happened," he said without looking up, already assessing Emma's limp limbs, her faint tremors returning in small, flickering bursts beneath her skin. Donovan inhaled sharply and forced himself to relay the events quickly, her burning feet, her collapsing legs, the escalating spasms, the stepmother's dismissal, the sudden weakness. The doctor's eyes hardened slightly at the mention of neglect, but he didn't interrupt. His hands moved with controlled precision as he lifted Emma's foot, gently flexing her toes, watching how the tendons responded. Her muscles reacted too slowly, some too rigid, some too soft, a pattern the doctor seemed to recognize immediately. "Get her vitals," he instructed. A nurse clipped sensors onto Emma's fingers, another positioned a cuff around her arm. The screens lit up almost instantly, heart rate too fast, oxygen dropping slightly, temperature edging high. Donovan stood beside the bed, unable to step back, his hands curled into fists at his sides. Emma's face twitched as another faint spasm passed through her leg, weaker than before yet more concerning because of its sluggishness. The doctor pressed lightly along her calf, noting the tension that came and went in irregular pulses. Emma whimpered, barely conscious, her voice paper thin and fading. "This isn't random," the doctor murmured. "This is neurological, and it's been building for quite some time." He turned to Donovan. "She told you anything about when the burning started?" Donovan shook his head. She could barely speak through the pain. The doctor nodded, his expression darkening with understanding. Children with chronic nerve flare conditions often can't express symptoms early on, especially if they're dismissed at home. The word dismissed sharpened the air like a blade. Donovan felt something inside him twist, but he forced himself to remain silent as the medical evaluation continued. A nurse lifted Emma's ankle again. This time, the doctor focused on the involuntary twitch that followed. "See that?" he said quietly. "That's not a voluntary response. That's nerve hyperreactivity." He moved to the monitor, tapping the screen. "Her muscle firing pattern is irregular. It's consistent with peripheral nerve hyperreactivity syndrome. Severe flare stage." Donovan felt the breath leave his chest. He had known, deep down, he had recognized the signs the moment he saw her folding inward on that porch. But hearing the diagnosis spoken aloud brought a rush of emotion he wasn't prepared for. It wasn't just fear. It was anger, relief, guilt. and something protective that tightened every muscle in his body. The doctor continued examining Emma, checking reflexes, watching the delayed responses with growing concern. "This flare didn't start this morning," he said. "This is the result of repeated episodes left unmanaged. Early intervention could have prevented this escalation." Donovan swallowed hard. Her stepmother said she was dramatic, sensitive. The doctor's jaw tensed. That kind of thinking is dangerous. Look at her. Her body is exhausted from fighting pain she shouldn't have had to endure alone. Emma stirred faintly, her lashes fluttering as she tried to open her eyes. Donovan moved closer, his voice softer. "Emma, I'm right here." She didn't reply, but her breathing eased the tiniest bit at the sound of his voice, as if some part of her recognized that she was finally in a place where someone understood. A nurse turned her gently onto her back to place cooling pads at her feet and calves, each pad designed to calm the burning sensation from the outside while medication addressed the internal misfiring. The doctor prepared an IV, the fluid clear and cool as it dripped down the tube. "This will help regulate the nerve activity," he explained. "It'll also calm the burning sensation and stabilize her heart rate. She may feel groggy, but she'll be safer very quickly." Donovan nodded, his throat tight. The doctor inserted the IV with careful precision. Emma flinched softly but didn't pull away. She was too weak to resist. Within minutes, the tremors began to soften, her breathing grew a little steadier, and the deep flush in her skin started to fade. Donovan felt his shoulders loosen for the first time since he'd lifted her from that porch. The child was stabilizing, slowly, fragilely, but undeniably. Diane's face flashed in his memory, a stiff smile, a dismissive tone, a child flinching at her voice. Donovan clenched his jaw. The doctor seemed to read the storm in his expression. "You did the right thing bringing her here," he said. "If you hadn't, the flare could have worsened into partial paralysis or severe nerve blocking." She was very close to that threshold. Donovan exhaled shakily, dragging a hand through his hair. "I knew something was wrong. I saw it all over her." The doctor glanced at him, studying him with a thoughtful look. "Most people wouldn't have recognized it. You did." A quiet beat passed. It may have saved her future. Emma's eyes fluttered open again, this time staying open a little longer. She looked up at Donovan through a haze of exhaustion, and for the first time all morning, the pain in her face eased enough for something small and vulnerable to appear: trust. The doctor adjusted the cooling pad and scribbled notes on a chart. "She'll need ongoing treatment, and she can't go back to an environment where her symptoms are ignored. Her flare pattern shows repeated neglect." Neglect. The word landed like a weight in the room. Donovan inhaled slowly. "What happens next?" The doctor paused, then glanced at Emma before answering. "There's something else you need to know." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Her flare patterns, they're advanced for her age. Very advanced. That means something in her daily environment has been triggering these episodes. Stress can do it. Fear can do it. Repeated emotional strain can do it." Donovan felt his pulse spike, a cold dread forming at the edges of his thoughts. The doctor looked him in the eye. "And I believe she's been experiencing all three." He hesitated, then added the final detail, the one that shifted everything about her future. "She cannot safely return to the home she came from." The next 24 hours unfolded like a quiet miracle stitched together by steady hands, medical certainty, and the kind of care Emma had never known before. Once the IV medication began regulating her nerve signals, the violent spasms eased into softer tremors, then settled into a manageable, exhausted stillness. The burning in her feet, once scorching enough to make her collapse, faded into a dull warmth the doctors promised would disappear entirely with continued treatment. She slept for long stretches, her breathing deepening, her small body slowly recovering from the storm it had battled alone for far too long. When she finally woke fully, blinking under the soft clinic light, her eyes were clearer. Fragile, still tired, but no longer trapped behind pain. The doctor stood at her bedside with a detailed long-term plan: regular nerve block therapy, scheduled monitoring, nutritional adjustments, low-stress routines, and a strict observation period to ensure no flare returned unexpectedly. Peripheral nerve hyperreactivity syndrome couldn't be cured, but it could be controlled, if handled with patience, compassion, and watchfulness. For the first time in her life, Emma had all three. Donovan remained nearby throughout every consultation, absorbing each instruction with a focus that surprised even the medical team. He asked questions that weren't just practical but thoughtful: how to ease morning stiffness, how to recognize early warning signs, how to adjust her daily routine so she wouldn't fear her own body. When the doctor emphasized the importance of emotional stability, Donovan's expression tightened in a way that didn't need words. He had seen the fear in Emma's shoulders each time Diane's name was mentioned. He had watched her flinch at the memory of being disbelieved. The clinic social worker confirmed it with careful, clinical calm. Emma's environment had become a danger to her health. She would not be returning home. At least, not with the same parental arrangement she had come from. Her father, currently out of town on business, was being contacted urgently. Child Protective Services had been notified. Everything was happening quickly, but with a precision that made it clear the situation was serious, documented, and not up for debate. Emma listened to parts of these conversations with wide, cautious eyes, gripping the blanket between her fingers. She didn't say much, but her silence wasn't the terrified quiet she'd shown on the porch. It was something gentler, hesitation mixed with dawning relief, like she was slowly realizing the pain wasn't coming back and that no one here blamed her for it. Whenever she shifted, Donovan was at her side instantly, adjusting the pillow, steadying her hand if her fingers trembled, offering reassurance in small, steady doses. He didn't overwhelm her or hover. He simply made her feel seen without needing to perform strength she didn't have. By evening, she was strong enough to sit up on her own, though her legs still felt weak and heavy. The nurse brought her a warm meal, something far more comforting than anything she usually received at home, and Emma ate slowly, savoring each bite as if warmth itself was new to her. Donovan stayed across from her, not eating, simply ensuring she knew she wasn't alone. When she glanced up, her voice small but honest, she whispered, "It doesn't burn anymore." Donovan smiled softly, a rare expression that softened the sharp lines of his usually composed face. "Good," he said. "That's how it should be." Over the next day, the clinic team transitioned Emma from IV medication to oral doses, monitoring her closely. The tremors subsided nearly completely. The doctor reviewed the plan again: short-term supervision at the clinic, ongoing therapy, and a temporary guardianship arrangement until her father arrived and decisions could be made officially. But one thing was certain: she was safe for the first time in a long time. Donovan watched her draw small circles on her blanket, her posture calmer now, her eyes drifting across the room as if trying to understand how everything had changed so quickly. She didn't ask for Diane. She didn't ask to go home. She only asked if the pain would come back. Donovan answered truthfully, "Not like before. Not if we take care of you properly." That word, "we," slipped out before he thought about it, but he didn't correct himself. Neither did she. As the evening sun sank low, painting warm gold across the clinic windows, the emotional transformation in the room was unmistakable. Emma no longer curled into herself when someone approached. She didn't shrink from shadows or brace at footsteps. Her shoulders eased. Her breathing deepened. She laughed once, softly, surprised by her own voice, and Donovan felt something shift inside him in a way he hadn't expected. She didn't only need medical care. She needed protection, consistency, safety that didn't disappear when the pain did. He couldn't ignore that truth, not after what he had witnessed. By the time the doctor returned with final paperwork and the latest neurological readings, Emma had drifted into an easy sleep. The doctor set the chart down quietly. "She's stabilizing well," he said. "She'll need long-term care and someone committed to her routine. But she'll recover. Kids are resilient when given the chance." Donovan nodded, his gaze lingering on the small figure curled beneath the blanket. "She deserves more than a chance." The doctor hesitated, studying him for a moment. "I can see you've become important to her already," he said gently. "Just know, whatever path comes next for her, she'll need stability. Not temporary support. Something lasting." Donovan didn't answer right away. His thoughts moved like a tide, steady and undeniable, pulling him toward something deeper than responsibility alone. His life, his polished success, his quiet routines, his calculated detachment, had never prepared him for a moment like this. And yet, standing here, he felt a clarity he hadn't felt in years. Some children came into a person's life quietly, unexpectedly, and changed everything, not through obligation, but through undeniable truth. He looked at Emma one more time, her face peaceful now that the pain was gone. A small life on the edge of collapse, now quietly rewriting his own. He exhaled slowly, a decision settling in him with absolute certainty. When he finally turned to the doctor, his voice was calm, steady, and irrevocably committed. "I want to take full responsibility for her care," he said. "Not just tonight, not just until her father returns. For as long as she needs." And with those words, he stepped into a future no one, not even he, had seen coming.